The morning sun cast long shadows across the metal corridors of Kepler Prime Station. Jake Martinez walked slowly toward his xenobiology classroom, his worn backpack slung over one shoulder. After 3 months at the Galactic Academy, he still felt like an outsider among his alien classmates. The hallways buzzed with different languages and sounds. Tall, gray-skinned keepers glided past on silent feet. Small, furry mummets chattered in high-pitched voices. The insect-like Vrex clicked their mandibles as they talked. Jake nodded politely to a group of Blue Aquari students who were discussing their homework in watery voices. Jake pushed open the door of Professor Zenta's advanced xenobiology class. The circular room was designed to accommodate many different body types. Some desks were filled with water for the Aquari. Others had special heating elements for the cold-blooded species. The silicates sat on crystalline platforms that helped them focus their energy. Professor Zen stood at the front of the room, his tall gray form imposing against a curved wall. His large black eyes scanned the students as they settled into their seats. Jake took his usual spot in the back corner, away from the main cluster of alien students. "Good morning, class," Professor Zen said in his deep, measured voice. "Today we will study apex predators from different worlds. This is an important lesson for any xenobiologist who might encounter dangerous life forms." The Vrex student named Click3 raised one of his 4 arms. His translation device crackled as he spoke. "Professor, will we be seeing actual predators today?" "No," clicked thrice. "We will only be listening to audio recordings. Even these sounds can be quite disturbing. So please prepare yourselves mentally." A nervous murmur went through the classroom. The Aquari student Lisa Tate's skin shifted to a worried pale blue color. The mummets began grooming themselves frantically, a sure sign of stress in their species. Professor Zen touched his datapad, and a large screen descended from the ceiling. Predator identification through auditory cues is a crucial survival skill. Many dangerous creatures announce their presence through calls, roars, or other vocalizations. Learning to recognize these sounds could save your life on an unknown planet. Jake pulled out his notebook and pen. Unlike his classmates who used advanced recording devices, he preferred old-fashioned note-taking. The simple tools reminded him of home, of sitting in biology class back in Colorado. We will start with some basic examples. Professor Zent continued. "Remember, the goal is not just to identify the creature, but to assess the threat level based on what you hear." The first recording began. A low, rumbling growl filled the room. It was deep and threatening, like distant thunder. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The mummets first stood on end. "This is a Dryon beast from Kepler, 442b. Professor Zent explained after the recording ended. Notice how the low frequency indicates a large creature. The sustained nature of the growl suggests it's territorial. Jake wrote notes about frequency patterns and animal behavior. He found the sound interesting, but not particularly frightening. It reminded him of the bears he'd sometimes heard while camping in the Rocky Mountains. The next recording was sharper, more aggressive. A series of barks and snarls echoed through the classroom. This time, a few of the smaller students actually ducked down in their seats. "Carthan pack hunters from Tau Ceti Prime," the professor announced. "They hunt in groups and use these calls to coordinate attacks." Jake tilted his head, listening carefully. The sounds were similar to a pack of coyotes he'd heard during a camping trip with his father. Coyotes could be dangerous, but they usually avoided humans. As the lesson continued, Professor Zent played more recordings. Each one seemed to affect the alien students more strongly than the last. The Vrex clicked their mandibles nervously. The Aquari changed colors rapidly, cycling through different shades of fear and anxiety. The silicates dimmed their inner light until they were barely glowing. Jake noticed their reactions with curiosity. The sounds were certainly intimidating, but they didn't trigger the same deep fear response in him that they seemed to cause in his classmates. He wondered if it had something to do with being human. "Now," Professor Zen said, his voice becoming more serious, "we will listen to some truly dangerous predators. These next recordings have been known to cause panic attacks in some species. If you need to leave the room, please do so quietly." 2 Mamite students immediately gathered their things and left. A silicate flickered nervously and asked for permission to dim the lights around his desk. Professor Zent granted both requests. The room grew tense. Jake looked around at his classmates and saw genuine fear in their various forms of expression. The Vrex were now clicking constantly, a sign of extreme agitation in their species. Lisa Tate had turned almost white, her Aquari skin barely showing any blue at all. The next recording, Professor Zen said slowly, comes from a planet in what you humans call the Milky Way. It had been classified as a Class 6 terror inducer by our psychological research department. Jake straightened in his chair. A planet in the Milky Way meant it was probably from somewhere near Earth. He was curious to hear what had scared the galactic researchers so badly. The recording began with silence. Then came a sound that made every alien in the room freeze in terror. It was a wild, piercing scream that seemed to cut through the air like a blade. The cry rose and fell, haunting and otherworldly. It spoke of wild places and ancient hunts. Around Jake, chaos erupted. Several students dove under their desks. Others activated emergency beacons on their personal devices. The Vrex translation devices started malfunctioning from the panic frequencies being produced by their owners. But Jake just sat there, listening with interest. He recognized the sound immediately. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth as he realized what had terrified his classmates so completely. Professor Zenta's voice cut through the panic. That recording has caused more fear responses than any other in our database. We obtained from a planet designated as Terra in the Sol system. Jake raised his hand calmly while his classmates continued to recover from their terror. Some were still shaking. Others were breathing heavily through whatever respiratory systems they possessed. "Yes, Jake?" Professor Zent asked, grateful for any student who could still speak normally. "Professor," Jake said in his calm, everyday voice, "that's just a mountain lion." The silence that followed Jake's words was so complete that the only sound in the classroom was a quiet hum of the air recycling system. Every alien student turned to stare at him with expressions of disbelief written across their various facial features. Professor Zent blinked his large black eyes several times, a sign of confusion in his species. He looked down at his data pad, then back at Jake, then at the pad again. "I'm sorry, Jake," Professor Zent said slowly. "Did you say mountain lion?" "Yes, sir," Jake replied, completely relaxed in his seat while his classmates remained in various states of panic. "We also call them cougars, pumas, or panthers sometimes. Depends on what part of the country you're from." Click 3, the Vrex student made a sound like grinding metal through his translator. You have a name for that creature of nightmares." Jake looked genuinely puzzled by the reaction. "Well, yeah, they're pretty common where I grew up in Colorado. I've heard them lots of times when I go camping with my family." Lisa Tate, the Aquari student, had turned an even paler shade of blue. Her gill slits fluttered rapidly as she processed this information. "You have encountered these death screamers and lived?" "Death screamers?" Jake almost laughed, but caught himself when he saw how serious his classmates were. "They're not that dangerous. I mean, you don't want to mess with one, but they usually avoid people. My dad always said they're more afraid of us than we are of them." Professor Zen consulted his data pad with increasing confusion. "According to our research files, this recording was obtained during a classified expedition to your planet. The research team described the source as, quote, a nightmare creature whose very voice could drive lesser species to madness." "Sounds like they never went camping," Jake said with a slight smile. "My little sister Emma hears them all the time at summer camp, and she's only 12. The reaction to this statement was immediate and dramatic. Several students made sounds of horror. A Mamite student named Furryquick began hyperventilating, his small chest rising and falling rapidly. 2 more silicates flickered so dimly they almost went out completely. "Your offspring, children, are exposed to these creatures?" asked a crystalline student whose name Jake couldn't pronounce. The translator made the student sound horrified. "Well, not exposed exactly," Jake explained patiently. "Mountain lions live in the mountains and forests. People camp in those areas for fun. The cats usually stay away from campsites, but sometimes you hear them calling at night. It's actually pretty cool." Professor Zenth was now scrolling frantically through his data files. Jake, this recording has been tested on 47 different species. It caused immediate fight or flight responses in all of them. 3 species actually requested that we destroy the recording to prevent accidental psychological trauma. Jake shrugged. Different species, different reactions, I guess. To me, it just sounds like a big cat doing its thing. Its thing, Lisa Tate whispered, her voice barely audible through the classroom's translation system. You know, marking territory, looking for a mate, that kind of stuff. Animals make noise to communicate. Mountain lions have really powerful voices because they need to be heard over long distances in the mountains. Click 3's mandibles were clicking so rapidly that his translator was having trouble keeping up. You speak of this terror beast as if it is merely an animal. It is just an animal, Jake said, looking confused. I mean, it's a predator, sure. They hunt deer and elk and smaller animals. But they're just cats. Really big cats. The word cats seemed to cause another wave of confusion among his classmates. Professor Zenth pulled up what appeared to be Earth's biological classification system on the main screen. According to this data, mountain lions are classified in the family Felidae. Professor Zenth read aloud. The same family as domestic cats? Right, Jake nodded. House cats and mountain lions are related. Same basic body plans, same hunting instincts, just different sizes. A Mamite student raised a trembling paw. You said domestic cats? You keep smaller versions of these nightmare screamers as companions? Jake was starting to realize just how differently his species viewed the world. Well, yeah, cats are really popular pets on Earth. My family has 2 of them, Whiskers and Shadow. They're great for catching mice. The mention of keeping predators as pets caused several students to activate their emergency communication devices. Professor Zenth had to raise his voice to restore order. Class, please remain calm, the professor announced. Jake, perhaps you could explain more about these domestic predators that humans keep as companions? They're not really predators, Jake said, though he could see this wasn't helping his classmates' anxiety levels. I mean, they hunt mice and birds sometimes, but mostly they just sleep and play. My cat Shadow likes to sleep on my bed and purr when I pet her. It makes the same vocalizations as a terror screamer? Asked a silicate student whose light was now so dim it was barely visible. Not exactly the same, Jake explained. House cats purr when they're happy. It's a nice sound. Mountain lions can purr too, but they also make the screaming sound you heard, especially during mating season. Professor Zenth looked like he was developing what humans might call a headache, if a species experienced such things. Jake, are you telling us that humans regularly share their living spaces with creatures related to what we consider one of the most psychologically terrifying sounds in the known galaxy? Jake thought about this for a moment. When you put it like that, it does sound kind of weird, but cats are really different from mountain lions. House cats only weigh like 10 or 15 pounds. Mountain lions can weigh up to 200 pounds. 200 pounds, Professor Zenth repeated slowly. And these creatures live near human population centers? Not really near, Jake clarified. They live in wild areas, but humans go into those areas a lot. For hiking, camping, hunting, skiing. Colorado has lots of outdoor activities. The classroom fell silent again as the alien students processed this information. The idea that humans voluntarily entered territories occupied by creatures that could produce such terrifying sounds was clearly beyond their comprehension. Lisa Tate finally spoke up, her voice small and confused. Why would your species deliberately enter the hunting grounds of such creatures? Jake smiled, thinking of his last camping trip with his family in Rocky Mountain National Park. Because the mountains are beautiful, and the chances of actually seeing a mountain lion are pretty small. They're really good at staying hidden. But the sound, Click 3 managed to say through his still malfunctioning translator. Like I said, you don't hear that often. And when you do, it's usually far away. My dad taught me that if you make noise while you're hiking, they'll hear you coming and avoid you. They don't want to fight humans any more than we want to fight them. Professor Zen saved his data and looked at Jake with something that might have been admiration, If keepers were capable of such emotions. Jake, I think we need to have a much longer conversation about human psychology and your planet's ecosystem. This changes quite a lot of our assumptions about your species. Professor Zent decided to continue with the lesson, though the atmosphere in the classroom had changed completely. The alien students kept glancing nervously at Jake, as if seeing him in a new and possibly dangerous light. Perhaps we should move on to other examples, Professor Zent announced, though his voice carried less confidence than before. I have several more recordings that demonstrate the variety of predator vocalizations across the galaxy. He touched his datapad, and a new sound filled the room. This one was a deep, resonant roar that seemed to shake the walls. It was long and powerful, speaking of massive size and territorial dominance. The sound made the Vrex students' chitin plates rattle against their desks. Around the room, alien students reacted with immediate fear. The mummets flattened themselves against their chairs, trying to appear as small as possible. The silicates dimmed their lights to almost nothing. Even the larger keeper students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jake listened thoughtfully, his head tilted slightly as he analyzed the sound. When it ended, he raised his hand again. That sounds like a bear, he said calmly. Probably a grizzly bear, based on how deep the roar is. Professor Zen checked his datapad with growing resignation. This recording is from Ursus Arctos Horribilis, from your planet Terra. The expedition team classified this as a Class 5 territorial nightmare. Grizzly bears are definitely dangerous, Jake agreed, but they're mostly in Alaska and Western Canada now. Some in the northern Rocky Mountains, too. My Uncle Pete saw one once when he was fishing in Alaska. He just backed away slowly and left the area. The bear wasn't really interested in him. Click 3 made a sound like metal scraping against stone. Your family members voluntarily enter territories occupied by these nightmare roarers? Alaska's a big place, Jake said with a shrug. Millions of people live there. You just have to be smart about it. Make noise when you're hiking. Keep food stored properly when you're camping. Don't get between a mother bear and her cubs. Basic stuff. Lisa Tate's skin had now turned almost transparent with fear. There are offspring of these creatures. Bear cubs are actually really cute, Jake said, then quickly added when he saw their expressions. But you never want to get near them. Mother bears are extremely protective. That's when they're most dangerous. Professor Zen played the next recording without comment. This one was different from the others. A series of sharp, barking howls that rose and fell in a haunting chorus. The sound spoke of pack hunting and coordinated attacks. The reaction was immediate and severe. Several students actually dove under their desks. Others activated emergency beacons on their personal communicators. The mummets began making high-pitched distress calls that their translators couldn't process. Jake listened to the entire recording with interest. When it ended, he was already nodding. Wolves, he said simply. Sounds like a pretty big pack, maybe 8 or 10 individuals. Wolves, Professor Zenth repeated flatly. Yeah, we used to have them all over North America, but they were mostly wiped out in the lower 48 states. They're making a comeback now, though. Yellowstone has a really successful wolf reintroduction program. A silicate student managed to flicker out a question. Your species deliberately returned these pack hunters to your territories? Wolves are important for the ecosystem, Jake explained. They control deer populations and keep the herds healthy by taking sick and weak animals. It's called natural selection. Plus, they usually avoid humans. Most people never see a wild wolf in their entire lives. But the sound whispered a Mamite student who was still hiding under his desk. The coordinated hunting calls. That's just how wolves communicate with their pack, Jake said. Each wolf has its own voice. They can recognize individual pack members from miles away just by their howls. It's actually pretty amazing. Professor Zenth was now looking at Jake with something approaching scientific fascination. Jake, are you telling us that your species coexists with multiple apex predators and considers this normal? I wouldn't say coexist exactly, Jake replied thoughtfully. Most predators avoid human settlements. But we do share the same general regions. Yeah, North America has black bears, grizzly bears, mountain lions, wolves, alligators in the south, sharks in the oceans. Other continents have their own predators. The mention of additional predators caused another wave of panic among his classmates. Professor Zent held up one hand for silence. Other continents? He asked carefully. Sure. Africa has lions, leopards, cheetahs, hyenas, crocodiles. Asia has tigers, snow leopards, leopards. Australia has everything that wants to kill you. Jake's casual mention of Australia seemed to break something in his alien classmates. Several more students activated emergency communications. Others began speaking rapidly in their native languages, overwhelming the classroom translation system with panicked chatter. Please, Professor Zen said loudly, trying to restore order. Everyone remained calm. Jake, perhaps you could be more specific about Australia? Australia's kind of special, Jake admitted. They have really venomous snakes, spiders that can kill you, crocodiles, sharks, jellyfish that are basically invisible and deadly. Even some of the plants are dangerous. But people still live there. Sydney's a great city. The classroom was now in complete chaos. Students were calling their home planets, requesting emergency evacuation, or simply sitting in stunned silence. Professor Zenth looked like he was reconsidering his entire career in xenobiology. Jake, the professor said slowly, how many of these dangerous creatures does Earth have? Jake thought about it for a moment. I don't know exactly. Thousands, I guess, if you count all the venomous snakes and spiders and stuff. Oh, and the ocean predators. Great white sharks, tiger sharks, bull sharks, orcas, giant squids. Each new predator Jake mentioned caused fresh waves of horror among his classmates. By now, most of them were either cowering under their desks or had activated some form of emergency protocol. And humans, Professor Zen said with the tone of someone trying to understand an impossible puzzle. Humans live on this planet voluntarily. It's our home, Jake said simply. Where else would we live? Anywhere, shouted Click 3, his translator crackling with emotional overload. Anywhere but a world populated by nightmare creatures. Jake looked around at his terrified classmates and realized that his normal, everyday life on Earth was something that most species in the galaxy would consider a horror story. He tried to think of a way to explain that wouldn't make things worse. Look, he said gently, I know it sounds scary, but you have to remember that these animals don't want to fight humans. Most of them are more afraid of us than we are of them. Humans are really good at avoiding dangerous situations. How? Asked Lisa Taith in a voice barely above a whisper. We're smart. We use tools. We build cities and houses to keep dangerous animals out. We've learned how to live safely alongside predators. And most of the really dangerous stuff is in wild areas where people don't usually go. Professor Zenth was taking notes frantically on his data pad. This explains so much about human behavior patterns that we've observed. Your species' apparent lack of fear response, your tendency toward risk-taking behavior, your adaptability. I guess when you grow up knowing that there are bears in the mountains and sharks in the ocean, other stuff doesn't seem as scary, Jake said. He looked around at his classmates, who were still in various states of panic, and had a sudden realization. Wait, he said slowly. What are the most dangerous predators on your home worlds? Professor Zenth looked at Jake's question and seemed to realize something important. He straightened his tall frame and addressed the class with renewed scientific interest. That is an excellent question, Jake. Perhaps we should examine the predator-prey relationships on other worlds to better understand the situation. Click 3, still trembling slightly, managed to speak through his translator. On my world, Rex Prime, our most dangerous predator is the tunnel stalker. But they only come out during the darkest moon phase, and they never venture near our hive cities. What do they sound like? Jake asked with genuine curiosity. They make small clicking sounds. Very quiet. Most Vrex never hear them, because we stay safely underground when they hunt. Jake nodded thoughtfully. So they're ambush predators. Probably solitary hunters if they're quiet. The fact that Jake could analyze an alien predator so calmly seemed to disturb his classmates even more. Lisa Tay spoke up next, her aquari skin still pale with lingering fear. On my world, we have the deep swimmers. They live in the ocean trenches and only hunt during storm seasons. We can feel their movements through water pressure changes, so we retreat to the shallow reefs until the storms pass. Smart, Jake said. Early warning systems are important. Do they ever come into shallow water? Never. Lisa Tate said firmly, they cannot survive in the warm shallows where we build our cities. Jake was beginning to see a pattern. So most of your predators are either very rare, seasonal, or they live in specific areas that your people can avoid? Professor Zent consulted his data files. That appears to be correct. Most civilized species evolved on worlds where the apex predators were either geographically isolated, had specific environmental requirements, or were rare enough that encounters were unusual. That makes sense, Jake said. If predators were constantly threatening settlements, it would be hard to develop technology and cities. Exactly, Professor Zent agreed, which makes your species quite unique. Earth appears to have multiple apex predators in the same regions where humans develop civilization. Jake thought about this. I guess that's true. Even in Europe, where most of the big predators were hunted out centuries ago, there are still wolves and bears in some areas, and humans have been dealing with predators for thousands of years. Professor Zent pulled up a new file on his datapad. I have one more recording to play. This one was classified at the highest threat level by our xenobiology research team. They described it as, quote, a sound so terrifying that it appears to trigger evolutionary fear responses in every species tested. The remaining students in the classroom looked at each other nervously. Several had already moved toward the exit doors. The mummets were huddled together in a tight group, their fur standing on end. This recording, Professor Zen continued, was obtained at great risk by a research team on Terra. 3 team members required psychological treatment after the expedition. The creature that made this sound was never visually confirmed, but tracks suggested something massive. Jake leaned forward with interest. A creature that had scared experienced xenobiologists and left massive tracks could be almost anything on Earth. Are you sure you want to hear this? Professor Zent asked the class. I can excuse anyone who wishes to leave. Half the remaining students immediately headed for the exit. Those who stayed moved as far from the speakers as possible and activated various personal protection devices. Professor Zent looked at Jake. I should warn you, this sound has never failed to produce a fear response. I'll be fine, Jake said calmly. What kind of environment was it recorded in? Deep forest, mountainous region, North American continent. Jake nodded. Okay, I'm ready. Professor Zent activated the recording. The classroom filled with the sound of wind through trees and distant bird calls. Then, cutting through the peaceful forest ambience, came a sound that froze every alien in the room. It started low, almost like a moan. Then it rose in pitch and volume, becoming a wild, unearthly bugle that seemed to echo from another world. The sound was deep and powerful, speaking of massive size and untamed wilderness. It rose and fell, then rose again, each note more haunting than the last. The effect on Jake's classmates was immediate and catastrophic. Those who remained dove under desks, activated emergency beacons, or simply curled into defensive positions. The silicates went completely dark. The wrecks made sounds like breaking glass. Even Professor Zent took several steps backward. Jake listened to the entire sequence with growing amusement. When it ended, he was actually smiling. Really? He said, looking around at his terrified classmates. That's what scared your research team. Professor Zenta's voice was shaky. Jake, that sound has triggered panic responses in every species we've tested. Our researchers described it as, quote, the voice of primordial terror. Jake started laughing. Not a mean laugh, but the kind of laugh that comes from genuine disbelief. Professor, that's just an elk. The silence that followed was absolute. An elk. Professor Zent repeated slowly. Yeah, a bull elk. They make that sound during rutting season. It's called bugling. They're trying to attract females and warn off other males. It's totally normal behavior. Click 3's translator was making broken sounds as he tried to speak. Normal behavior? Sure. September through October. You hear elk bugling all over the Rocky Mountains. Hunters actually use it to locate herds. My dad taught me how to make elk calls when I was 10. The statement that humans could imitate this primordial terror sound caused fresh panic among his classmates. Several more emergency beacons activated. Elk are deer, right? Jake continued, oblivious to the chaos around him. Big deer, but still just deer. They eat grass and leaves. The males get pretty aggressive during mating season, but they're not predators. Professor Zent was now staring at Jake like he was some kind of alien specimen, which, from the professor's perspective, he probably was. Jake, Professor Zen said carefully, are you telling us that this sound, which our research team described as the most psychologically disturbing vocalization they'd ever encountered, is made by herbivores? Yep, plant eaters. They're actually pretty majestic. People pay money to go on elk watching tours in places like Yellowstone. Great photography opportunities. People pay to encounter these creatures? Whispered Lisa Taith. Oh yeah, elk are popular with wildlife photographers. You can get some amazing shots during rutting season, especially if you catch a big bull with a full rack of antlers silhouetted against the sunrise. The casual way Jake described approaching creatures that produce sounds of primordial terror for photography purposes seemed to break the last bit of psychological resistance his classmates had left. Professor Zent sat down heavily in his chair. Class dismissed, he said quietly. I need to contact the Galactic Biology Council. Immediately, as his classmates fled the room in various states of panic, Jake packed up his notebook and prepared to leave. He paused at Professor Zenta's desk. Professor, are you okay? You look a little pale. Professor Zent looked up at Jake with what might have been admiration or terror. Jake, I think we need to completely reassess everything we thought we knew about human psychology and your planet's ecosystem. Jake shrugged. If you want to know about Earth animals, I'm happy to help. I've got tons of pictures and videos on my personal device. My little sister Emma is really into wildlife photography. The mention that a human child actively sought out dangerous wildlife for recreational purposes was a final straw. Professor Zent activated his emergency communication system and began calling for backup from the xenopsychology department. Jake left the classroom, wondering why his classmates always seemed so nervous during biology lessons. Within hours, word of the incident in Professor Zenta's class had spread throughout Kepler Prime Station. Jake found himself surrounded by curious faculty members and students wherever he went. During lunch in the main cafeteria, he looked up from his meal to find Dr. Keth Prime, the head of Predator Studies, standing at his table. Mr. Martinez, Dr. Keth Prime said in a formal tone that his species used for important matters. I understand you had quite an interesting discussion in Professor Zenta's class today. Jake swallowed his bite of synthesized protein and nodded. I guess so. Is Professor Zent okay? He seemed pretty shaken up. He is. Processing some new information, Dr. Keth Prime said diplomatically. Would you mind if I asked you some questions about your planet's ecosystem? Sure, Jake said, gesturing to an empty chair. What would you like to know? Dr. Keth Prime activated a recording device and sat down. Several other faculty members gathered nearby, pretending to eat while obviously listening to the conversation. Let's start with the mountain lion, Dr. Keth Prime said. Our research classified its vocalization as a Class 7 nightmare inducer. You called it just a cougar. Can you explain this difference in perception? Jake thought for a moment. Well, cougars are definitely powerful predators. An adult male can weigh up to 200 pounds, and they're incredibly athletic. They can jump 40 feet horizontally and 18 feet vertically. Their bite force is around 400 pounds per square inch. Several faculty members took notes frantically. Dr. Keth Prime looked impressed and terrified at the same time. But, Jake continued, they almost never attack humans. In Colorado, where I'm from, we might have 1 or 2 cougar attacks per year in the entire state. And Colorado has thousands of cougars. Thousands? Dr. Keth Prime's voice cracked slightly. Maybe 3,000 to 7,000, depending on which wildlife study you read. Colorado also has about 5.5 million people. so the odds of ever encountering one are pretty small. Jake pulled out his personal device and scrolled through his photo files. Here, let me show you some pictures from our last camping trip. The photos showed Jake and his family hiking through beautiful mountain landscapes. In several shots, signs were visible warning about mountain lion activity in the area. Your family, Dr. Keth Prime said slowly, voluntarily entered territory with warning signs about these predators? Well, yeah, the signs are just to make people aware. You're supposed to make noise while you hike, keep small children close, and back away slowly if you see one. Basic safety stuff. Jake scrolled to another photo showing his younger sister Emma, a smiling 12-year-old girl, standing next to a trail marker. This was taken about 50 yards from where we heard a cougar calling that night. Emma thought it was cool. The fact that a human child considered the nightmare scream to be interesting rather than terrifying seemed to cause another minor crisis among the assembled faculty members. Dr. Keth Prime leaned forward. Jake, you mentioned that cougars rarely attack humans. What about the other predators on your world? Most of them are the same way, Jake said. Black bears are actually pretty timid. They usually run away if they see people. Brown bears and grizzlies are more dangerous, but attacks are still really rare. Most bear attacks happen when people surprise a bear or get between a mother and her cubs. And the wolves? Asked Professor Zent, who had apparently recovered enough to join the conversation. Wolf attacks on humans are incredibly rare, Jake explained. Like, almost unheard of in North America. Wolves are smart enough to know that humans are dangerous. We've been their main predator for thousands of years. This statement caused some confusion among the faculty members. Dr. Keth Prime consulted his data pad. You said humans are predators of wolves? Well, not anymore, mostly. But historically, yeah, humans hunted wolves almost to extinction in North America. We're really good at hunting large predators. The realization that humans were not just prey animals sharing territory with apex predators, but were actually successful predators themselves, seemed to shift the entire conversation. Jake, Professor Zen said carefully, what would you say is the most dangerous predator on Earth? Jake considered this seriously. Probably humans, to be honest. We've driven lots of species extinct. We can hunt almost anything, and we're incredibly adaptable. Other than humans, maybe saltwater crocodiles or polar bears, depending on the situation. He pulled up more photos on his device. Here are some pictures from when my family visited Australia last year. The photos showed Jake and his family at various tourist attractions, holding koalas, swimming at beaches, hiking through forests. In several shots, warning signs were visible about dangerous wildlife. This was at Kakadu National Park. Jake said, pointing to a photo of his family standing in front of a large warning sign about crocodiles. The rangers told us that saltwater crocs can grow up to 23 feet long and weigh over 2,000 pounds. Several faculty members made sounds of distress. Dr. Keth Prime was now taking notes so rapidly that his writing device was smoking. And you swam in waters with these creatures? Asked Professor Zent. Not in the same areas, Jake clarified. There are designated swimming areas that are checked regularly. The tour guides know where it's safe. Jake scrolled to another photo showing his family on a boat. This is from our Great Barrier Reef tour. We went snorkeling and saw some reef sharks. They were beautiful. The casual mention of swimming with sharks caused another wave of panic among the faculty members. Jake noticed their reactions and tried to be more reassuring. Look, I know it sounds scary, but humans have been living with dangerous animals for our entire evolutionary history. We've gotten really good at managing risk. Most people never have dangerous encounters with wild animals. Most people, Dr. Keth Prime asked. Well, some people actively seek out dangerous animals. Wildlife photographers, researchers, adventure tourists. My Uncle Pete guides hunting trips in Alaska. He's encountered dozens of grizzly bears and never been hurt. He seeks out the nightmare roarers professionally? Professor Zent asked weakly. Grizzly bears, yeah, though mostly he's helping hunters find elk, deer, and moose. Bears are just part of the environment up there. Jake realized he was making things worse and tried a different approach. Maybe it would help if I showed you some videos? I have footage of most of these animals behaving normally. When you see how they actually act, they're not as scary as they sound. The suggestion that they watch videos of Earth's nightmare creatures caused several faculty members to immediately excuse themselves from the conversation. Dr. Keth Prime, however, leaned forward with scientific interest. That might be very helpful, Jake. We need to understand how humans perceive these creatures so differently than other species. Jake activated his device's holographic display and selected a video file. This is from Yellowstone National Park. My family visited there 2 years ago. The video showed a peaceful meadow with a small stream running through it. Suddenly, a large grizzly bear emerged from the trees and began drinking from the stream. The bear was massive, easily weighing over 600 pounds, with powerful muscles visible beneath its thick fur. Several remaining faculty members gasped or made species-appropriate sounds of fear. The bear in the video looked directly at the camera for a moment, then continued drinking peacefully. My dad shot this from about 100 yards away, Jake narrated. The bear knew we were there, but didn't see us as a threat. We stayed still and quiet, and after about 10 minutes, it wandered back into the forest. Dr. Keth Prime was staring at the video with fascination and terror. This creature, it could have easily killed your entire family. Probably, Jake agreed cheerfully, but it had no reason to. We weren't threatening its food or cubs. We kept our distance, and we didn't make any sudden movements. Bears are smart. They don't waste energy fighting unless they have to. The concept that humans could successfully predict and avoid conflicts with such powerful predators seemed to be a revelation to the assembled faculty members. By the next morning, Jake's casual revelations about Earth's wildlife had triggered what could only be described as a scientific crisis throughout the Galactic Academy. Emergency meetings were being held in conference rooms across the station. Faculty members from dozens of species gathered to discuss the implications of what they had learned. Jake was eating breakfast in the cafeteria when Dr. Keth Prime approached with a datapad and an expression that suggested he hadn't slept much. Jake, I need to ask you about some additional species we found in Earth's biological database, Dr. Keth Prime said, sitting down heavily across from the human student. Sure, Jake said between bites of his synthetic eggs. What do you want to know? Dr. Keth Prime consulted his datapad with the careful attention of someone handling dangerous information. We found references to creatures called hippos. Our preliminary research suggests they kill more humans annually than most other large animals. Hippopotamuses, yeah. Jake nodded. They're really aggressive, especially around water. You definitely don't want to get between a hippo and its river. And yet, Dr. Keth Prime continued, we found thousands of images and videos of humans observing these creatures voluntarily. Jake pulled out his personal device. My family went on a safari in Kenya when I was 15. Here, look at this. The holographic display showed Jake and his family on a small boat floating down a river. Nearby, massive gray shapes moved through the water. One enormous hippo surfaced just 20 feet from their boat, revealing a mouth full of enormous teeth. Those teeth are about 20 inches long, Jake explained calmly. Hippos can bite through small boats if they want to, but the tour guides know how to read their behavior. This one was just curious. Dr. Keth Prime made notes frantically. Your species pays money to be placed in proximity to creatures that could easily kill them. It's called tourism, Jake said with a slight smile. Millions of people go on safari every year. It's pretty safe if you follow the rules and use experienced guides. Professor Zent appeared at their table, looking like he'd been awake all night. Jake, we need to discuss the creatures you call great white sharks. Oh, great whites are amazing, Jake said enthusiastically. Perfect predators, basically unchanged for millions of years. Some of them can grow over 20 feet long. He pulled up another video on his device. This one showed crystal clear blue water, with a massive shark gliding silently past camera. The creature was all muscle and teeth, moving with deadly grace. This was shot from a cage diving operation in South Africa, Jake explained. That's probably a 15-foot female. You can tell by the size and the way she moves. Cage diving? Professor Zent asked weakly. Yeah, You get in a metal cage, and they lower it into the water where great whites are feeding. The sharks come right up to investigate. It's incredible. The concept of humans voluntarily entering the water with apex predators, even in protective cages, seemed to overwhelm both professors. Dr. Keth Prime was now taking notes so rapidly that his writing instrument was leaving scorch marks on his datapad. Jake noticed their distress and tried to be reassuring. Look, shark attacks are really rare. You're more likely to be struck by lightning than attacked by a shark. Most sharks aren't interested in humans at all. Most sharks, Professor Zent repeated. Well, there are over 500 species of sharks. Great whites, tiger sharks, and bull sharks are the most dangerous to humans, but even they rarely attack people. Usually it's a case of mistaken identity. Jake scrolled to more photos on his device. Here's my sister Emma swimming with reef sharks in the Bahamas last summer. The image showed a smiling 12-year-old girl underwater, surrounded by several sleek gray sharks. She was wearing only basic diving gear and appeared completely relaxed. Both professors stared at the image in horror. The idea that humans allowed their children to swim with multiple sharks was apparently beyond their comprehension. The reef sharks are pretty harmless, Jake explained. They're more afraid of people than people are of them. Emma said it was like swimming with underwater puppies. Dr. Keth Prime looked up from his notes with an expression of scientific bewilderment. Jake, yesterday you mentioned creatures in Australia. Could you elaborate? Jake's face lit up. Australia is really interesting from a biological perspective. Isolated continent. So they developed unique species. He activated a new series of images on his device. This is a saltwater crocodile we saw at a wildlife park in Queensland. The image showed a massive reptile, easily 20 feet long, with jaws that could crush a small vehicle. Jake and his family were standing behind what appeared to be a relatively low fence, maybe 6 feet from the creature. Steve Irwin made crocodiles famous, Jake continued. He used to wrestle with them on television. Really dangerous, but he knew what he was doing. Someone wrestled with these creatures for entertainment? Asked Professor Zent in a voice barely above a whisper. Steve was a professional, though regular people just watch from safe distances. Jake scrolled to another image. This is a funnel web spider, one of the most venomous spiders in the world. Their bite can kill a human in 15 minutes without treatment. The image showed a large, aggressive-looking spider with prominent fangs. Both professors recoiled from the holographic display. But Australia has really good anti-venom programs, Jake continued cheerfully. Deaths from spider bites are pretty rare now, maybe 1 or 2 per year in the whole country. 1 or 2 deaths per year is considered acceptable? Dr. Keth Prime asked. Australia has about 25 million people, Jake explained. Statistically, venomous animals are way less dangerous than car accidents or heart disease. The casual way Jake discussed deadly creatures in statistical terms seemed to disturb his professors even more than the creatures themselves. Professor Zen consulted his own datapad. Jake, we found references to something called Shark Week in your planet's entertainment media. Oh, yeah, it's really popular, Jake said. Whole week of television programs about sharks. Educational stuff, but also some sensationalized content. Lots of people watch it. Your species watches programs about apex marine predators for entertainment? Sure, sharks are fascinating. Perfect killing machines that have survived multiple mass extinction events. What's not to like? The phrase perfect killing machines caused both professors to flinch visibly. Jake realized he was probably making things worse and tried a different approach. Look, I think the main thing you need to understand is that humans evolved alongside all these predators. We developed big brains, tools, and social cooperation partly because we had to survive in a world full of dangerous animals. And this made your species less afraid? Asked Dr. Keth Prime. It made us smarter about managing risk. Jake said, we learned to read animal behavior, to avoid dangerous situations, and to use tools and tactics that let us coexist with predators. Most of the time, anyway. Professor Zenth was now staring at Jake like he was some kind of impossible puzzle. Jake, What you're describing suggests that humans are not just another prey species. You're describing a species that successfully competes with apex predators for territory and resources. I guess that's true, Jake said thoughtfully. Humans are really good at adapting to different environments. We live everywhere from the Arctic to tropical rainforests to deserts. Wherever we go, we figure out how to deal with the local predators. By becoming apex predators yourselves, Dr. Keth Prime concluded. Jake considered this. Yeah, I suppose so. Though we're omnivores, technically. We eat plants too. The fact that humans were omnivorous apex predators seemed to be the final piece of a puzzle that both professors were struggling to solve. They exchanged glances that suggested a fundamental shift in their understanding of human nature. Jake, Dr. Keth Prime said slowly, I think we need to arrange some meetings with the Galactic Biology Council. What you've told us changes everything we thought we knew about your species' psychological profile and threat assessment. Sometimes, yeah, field research gives you information you can't get any other way. My Uncle Pete spent 6 months in Alaska studying wolfpack behavior. He said it was the best experience of his life. Jake showed more images of researchers working with various dangerous animals. The key is understanding the animals' behavior patterns, respecting their space, and knowing how to read their body language. Professor Zenth looked troubled. Jake, this suggests that humans have developed some kind of innate ability to predict and avoid predator attacks. Maybe, Jake said thoughtfully, or maybe we're just really good at learning from experience. Humans who couldn't figure out how to avoid predators didn't survive to have children. He clicked to a new slide showing various domestic animals. We also domesticated some predator species. Dogs are descended from wolves. Cats are related to all the big cats we talked about earlier. The image showed Jake's family dog, a German shepherd, playing with his 2 house cats. Buster weighs about 90 pounds and has the same hunting instincts as a wolf, Jake explained. But he's been bred for thousands of generations to work with humans instead of against us. The concept of deliberately breeding predators to live in human homes seemed to cause several audience members to activate emergency protocols. Cats are even more interesting, Jake continued. House cats still have all the hunting instincts of their wild relatives. They kill billions of small animals every year, but they also provide companionship and emotional support to humans. He showed a video of one of his cats, Shadow, purring while being petted. That sound she's making is called purring. It's how cats show contentment. Mountain lions can purr too. The connection between the terrifying mountain lion scream from the original class and the peaceful sound of a contented house cat seemed to break something in several audience members' understanding of reality. Dr. Keth Prime approached the podium. Jake, I think we need to discuss the implications of what you've shared with us. The Galactic Council is preparing to reclassify your species. Reclassify how? Jake asked. From unremarkable omnivores to apex predator specialists, Dr. Keth Prime explained. The data suggests that humans have evolved unique psychological and behavioral adaptations for coexisting with dangerous predators. Jake considered this. I guess that makes sense. Though most humans probably don't think of themselves as predator specialists. Perhaps that's exactly what makes you so effective, suggested Professor Zenth. Your species has internalized predator management strategies to such a degree that they seem normal to you. Jake looked out at the audience of fascinated alien faces and realized that his normal, everyday life on Earth represented something extraordinary from their perspective. I guess when you put it that way, he said, humans are pretty unique, but it's just how we evolved. Earth is a dangerous place, so we learn to be dangerous too. The simple, matter-of-fact way Jake described his species' evolution into apex predators seemed to encapsulate everything the alien researchers have been trying to understand. In the question-and-answer session that followed, Jake fielded inquiries about everything from human pain tolerance to risk-taking behavior to the psychological effects of living with predator species as pets. By the end of the seminar, it was clear that the Galactic Academy's understanding of human nature had been fundamentally transformed. Chancellor Vorth Prime returned to the podium. Jake Martinez, on behalf of the Galactic Academy, I present you with the first ever degree in comparative predator psychology. You're also hereby appointed as Earth's first interspecies wildlife liaison. The ceremony concluded with what had become a tradition during Jake's time at the Academy. A recording of various Earth predators was played, starting with a mountain lion scream that had started everything. Jake listened with the same calm interest he had shown in that first class 6 months ago. Around him, his alien classmates and professors listened with a mixture of residual fear and newfound appreciation for the sounds that had once terrified them completely. When the recording ended with a haunting bugle of a bull elk, Jake smiled and waved to the audience. "If any of you want to hear what that sounds like in person," he called out, "elk season starts in September in Colorado. Just saying." The suggestion that audience members might voluntarily expose themselves to the primordial terror sound in its natural environment caused one final wave of nervous excitement through the crowd. As Jake left the stage with his diplomas and credentials, he was already making plans for the future. The new wildlife management program would need facilities, staff, and carefully designed training protocols. But more importantly, it would need to build bridges between species that had very different relationships with the concept of danger. His personal device chimed with a message from his family back on Earth. His little sister Emma had attached a new video from her latest wildlife photography expedition. The footage showed a family of black bears playing in a mountain stream, completely unaware that their casual afternoon activities would probably require psychological counseling from most galactic species. Jake smiled as he watched the video. Some things he realized would never change. Earth would always be a world where humans shared space with creatures that other species considered living nightmares. But maybe now that was something to be proud of rather than just a fact of everyday life. The Galactic Academy had taught him many things, but perhaps the most important was this: what makes you different might also make you valuable. And sometimes, the most extraordinary thing about yourself is what you've always taken for granted. As he walked through the station corridors for the last time as a student, Jake began planning his first official report to the Galactic Council. He was thinking about including audio samples of wolves, grizzly bears, and maybe even some Australian wildlife. After all, if they thought mountain lions were scary, wait until they heard about Tasmanian devils.